Hi friends, I am so glad that you're joining me today for a little journaling. I did 5 entries this week on James chapter 3 verses 5 through 12, and on the last one I did a demo with Distress Oxides, so I hope you'll hang in there for that. Let's jump right in. James spends a lot of time warning us about our words. They really matter. And when a warning is repeated this many times in the Bible with this many examples, we really ought to pay attention. I pray that you will join me in asking God to empower us as his chosen people to control our tongues better and to honor him with them and to be better witness to those around us of honorable talk and speech and use of our tongue. For James' comparison of our tongue to a spark that causes a great fire, I use this image as a guide for my entry. I sketched the hand and the matchbook in pencil, and then I painted them with watercolor. Then I painted the blue background. While it was still wet, I brushed in just a couple strokes of that yellow to indicate the spreading fire. And when that dried, I used a small flat brush to dab in the pine trees representing the forest. I outlined and wrote out the verse with a black marker after I making sure that it wouldn't bleed through the page. And this is what I ended up with. In verse 6, James continues by pointing out the power for evil that our tongue holds. Our words set the course, the whole course of our life. The wrong words set the course of our life on fire. We can't take them back once they leave our mouths. Those evil words have dire consequences. My time journaling these verses allowed lots of time for reflecting on my words and what motivates them. I spend time just praying silently as I'm journaling for patience and kindness and love, all those character traits that walking with Jesus are to produce. James is not done making his point. He elaborates in verses 7 and 8, writing, all kinds of animals, birds, reptiles, and sea creatures are being tamed and have been tamed by mankind. But no human being can tame the tongue. It's a restless evil full of deadly poison. Boy, spending some time illustrating these verses, leading me to consider my words and how I use them. And I'm also remembering the warning of James 1, verse 22, which says, do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourself. Do what it says. I pray that God will use this time journaling to transform my heart so that the words that flow from it honor him. This verse conjured up a lot of images that would have been hard to create, so I Googled taming the tongue, and I love this image to illustrate the truth. I paired it with a number of animals that have been tamed by us, by man, and feel this entry conveys the point well and will have a lasting effect on my tongue. And James points out the reasons we should want such transformation in verses 9 and 10. He writes, with the tongue we praise our Lord and Father, and with it we curse human beings who have been made in God's likeness. Out of the same mouth come praise and cursing. My brothers and sisters, this should not be. I sketched a woman pouring out both praise and cursing to document this point and help impress it on me so that hopefully I live it better going forward. I filmed my final entry using Distress Oxides in response to James 3, 11, and 12. I hadn't worked with them for a long time, and I was kind of worn out and decided I was just going to spend some time creating. I looked at the next section of James and to consider what kind of abstract background I might create with them just to contain the verse later. I was just looking for some quiet time creating without any kind of agenda. But as I considered the verses, I began to picture the absurdity of this fig tree bearing olives, a grapevine bearing figs, and a salt spring producing fresh water. And I just set up my camera and let it roll as I played with these distressed oxides. I began with the colors frayed burlap and ground espresso to create the banks of the spring of water. And I'm using a blending tool, though I'm not working very hard to actually blend them. You can see the rounded edges of the blending pad that I'm leaving behind. I smudged some blue tumbled glass Distress Oxide on my plastic mat, and then I sprayed it with water so I could use a paintbrush to apply it for the spring water. I didn't want to leave the sky completely white, but I also didn't want it solid blue like the spring, so I cut a ruffled edge to create some white clouds in the blue sky. I was more careful with my blending this time and eliminated the sharp edges by starting off on my cutout cloud and then swirling onto my page. Adding water is what creates texture and that oxidized look that I want for the water in the banks of the spring. So I covered up the sky to protect it and then sprayed and dabbed some water where I wanted that look. I started building up some more color in the water just to convey some movement with splotches and also separate it from the sky. I smudged some bundled sage and sprayed it with water on an acrylic block to stamp as the beginnings of my tree. I added a second green called peeled paint and added layers with my blending tool, as well as loading a paintbrush with a lot of color to add splatters. And I used a blow dryer between layers to dry them and make sure that they didn't just blend together. For the tree trunk, I cut out a template and I used the same browns as before, using my blending tool to just kind of blend them onto the page. To give it some texture, I sprayed water over it and dabbed a few drops of water right on it. As the water dried, it oxidized and gave it that texture, and the larger dabs of water created more oxidation and variety in those areas. I also painted on a little gray hickory smoke to the tree trunk. I blended then some of the green and blue paint onto the spring water after noticing the soft green, beautiful color along the edges where the frayed burlap and the bundled sage came in contact. I decided to add more of that look to the water. I wanted to create a vibrant purple for the cluster of grapes that are going to be growing on the vine. So I used a hole punch to create a template, and then I mixed some acrylic paint, a blue and a red, to create the right color. I just used a sponge to dab it over the template onto my page. I went back to Distress Oxide for the figs growing on the same vine and used the frayed burlap and bundled sage colors for them. I know olives on a tree have a green shell around them, but I wanted them to stand out on my green tree, so my fig tree is growing black olives. I made them with a woody 3-in-1 Stabilo pencil. These are perfect for kids, and they actually function as a colored pencil, a watercolor pencil, and a wax pencil all in one. Once I draw them on the tree, I can get a wet brush and move the color around just as if I'm painting with the color I've applied. I added some green leaves to the vines with that bundled sage Distressed Oxide, and I hope to add some more depth to the tree, so I added a green distressed ink called Mowed Lawn. The inks are transparent, but they don't get that milky oxidized look like the Distressed Oxides, and sometimes they can appear more vibrant. Because this project is kind of a retreat for me of a sort, I'm a bit tired from everything going on in my life this week. I've chosen to simply write the verse out in my own handwriting rather than working on a more elaborate lettering. I love varying the fonts to match the tone of the verse, but also think it's important to sometimes just strip it down to my natural writing as well. I used a black Posca pen for that lettering. I'm loving the variation of color in the water. I'm thinking it reflects the verse's reference to both salt water and fresh water coming from the same spring. I'm using a Uniball Deluxe micro pen to add some black outlines here and there before finishing it up. I'm going to seal the oxides now to make them permanent by applying Vaseline or petroleum jelly. This will prevent them from reacting to water or smearing. After covering the whole page, I wipe it off with a clean paper towel or a tissue because you don't want to feel any of that greasiness on it. It also forces me to call the project complete because most products that I might want to add now will just bead up on top of that Vaseline jelly. I might add that I tested this Vaseline over every product in my entry on a separate piece of paper to be sure it's not going to smear anything. And I know this petroleum jelly is a messy process, but you don't feel it at all after wiping it down. And truly, it's a great moisturizer for my hands. There are professional products probably designed for sealing the distressed oxides and inks, but I don't have any, and this works just fine for me. Thank you for joining me for some journaling today. I will be working on it again this week and have some more ready to share with you next week. I hope you have a great time journaling as well this week. God bless you.